In some of the prior videos, I mentioned these ideas of permissiveness, antagonism, and synergism. And these are hormone relationships. How hormones affect or interact with one another in their actions on the body. Hormone relationships. And there's three basic categories of this. The first one is synergism. When something has a synergistic effect, they act together. Okay? So both hormones in this case, or however many hormones you have, both hormones have similar effects on the body. But these effects are actually independent of the other hormone. Okay, so for example, we can talk about maybe blood glucose. There's a hormone called glucagon, which is made in the pancreas. It's actually made by something called alpha cells of the pancreas. Now you can run through, just knowing the name and where it's made, a laundry list of information about glucagon. But we need to know what it can do. And what it does, as the name suggests, is it affects the liver to cause the liver to release glucose and break down stored glycogen to ultimately increase blood glucose. Now, a fasted blood glucose is normally somewhere between 70 and 100 milligrams per deciliter. But when we release glucagon, we're going to be increasing the normal amount of the amount of glucose found in the blood. This hormone and the storage within the liver helps us maintain an even blood sugar level so that our cells have energy when they need it. Now, there's other hormones that also do this. If we add in, say, cortisol, now cortisol is a steroid hormone. I know that because it's made by the zona fasciculata of the adrenal cortex. Of the zona glomerulosa fasciculata is the second one. These come from the glucocorticoid layer. Fasciculata, probably spelling that wrong. And the main function of cortisol is to increase blood glucose. Now, if we have glucagon raising blood glucose and we release some cortisol, it's going to have an additive effect. It's going to cause glucose levels to go even higher. Now there's another hormone like epinephrine and norepinephrine, these tyrosine derivatives, made by the adrenal medulla that also, these are made by adrenal chromaffin or medullary chromaffin cells, adrenal medullary chromaffin cells, all to increase blood glucose. Same thing. Now, they're going to have an additive effect. They have the same effect, but these are independent of one another. So if you have glucagon released at the same time cortisol is released, at the same time epinephrine is released, at the same time norepinephrine, you're talking about blood glucose levels that are going to go 140, 160, 180, 210. Now, none of these would get us up to that level by themselves, but with the synergism of all these acting together, we get an additive effect. Now, mind you, these additive effects have diminishing returns because as blood glucose levels get higher and higher, it also feeds back to inhibit these through a feedback loop. So it's not like you get quite as much as any of these alone, all added together, but rather in incrementally decreasing amounts, so that we don't overshoot our blood sugar by way too much when all these are present. So you can start organizing a lot of these hormones based on their common functions. These all can raise blood glucose. Growth hormone can do it too. Growth hormone producing cells of the anterior pituitary is what these come from. And they also increase blood glucose. Increase blood glucose. That's all synergism. Let's think of antagonism now. So this was having a synergistic effect, but now let's talk antagonism. That's just the opposite. One negates the other. They have opposite effects. A hormone that has the opposite effect of all of these, this is where hormones have opposite or contrasting effects on the body. And they're competing with one another. So, for example, glucagon causes the release of glucose, but insulin decreases blood glucose. These are actually made by beta cells of the pancreas. And these are going to decrease blood glucose. So when you're releasing glucagon and releasing insulin, you might not see that blood glucose level change at all, because everything that's putting into the blood, this is taking out of the blood. Where all of these had a synergistic effect with glucagon. Remember, another name for growth hormone is somatotropin. It's another name for it. So it could be somatotropin producing cells of the anterior pituitary. Insulin has a contrasting effect. Now there's one more category, and that's permissiveness. And permissiveness is where one hormone will allow the other hormone to work. Without that hormone, it's not going to work at all. This is different than synergism. Synergism is independent of one another to some degree. Permissiveness requires the other. So a nice example of this one is growth hormone. Growth hormone's relationship with the thyroid hormones. And those thyroid hormones are T3, triiodotyrosine, and thyroxine, T4, is another thyroid hormone. One's found in the blood in greater concentrations, but the other one has a stronger binding affinity. I'll talk about that next, binding affinity. But growth hormone cannot work to allow somatic cells to change how? To grow. It can't work properly if thyroid hormone isn't present. Now, it can still do things like raise blood glucose, but as far as its function on growth and development, it will not work unless thyroid hormone is present. And this is why in third world countries, you can see, and in this country, pituitary dwarfs who have adequate growth hormone levels. Their growth hormone levels are actually a little bit on the high side, trying to get them to grow. But because they have a thyroid deficiency, maybe even a goiter, where they're not making thyroid hormone properly, they don't grow at all. In the absence of this, this does not work. So in the absence of one, the other won't work. Both hormones are required to have an effect, or the desired effect. Okay, so those are three different relationships that hormones can have with one another. A good way to start grouping some hormones is to learn which ones allow the actions of others. They'll probably share the common function. Which ones antagonize or contradict others. Sometimes understanding what something is requires understanding what something is not. And synergism. Here you can group several different hormones into common functions.